how Ukraine viewed today on the Capitol Hill? Why Ukraine is important for United States? That's the question a lot of Ukrainians ask.
Right.
Why they're broader to support us?
Well, it's still important because it plays a major contributing role in fostering security and stability in the region and the world. And if you have an independent, democratic, prosperous Ukraine, you're going to have a Europe and a region that's a lot better. But second of all, and I'll be a little less diplomatic than some might be on this, but without Ukraine, you don't have a Russian Empire or a Soviet Union. And that clearly is in the United States and the world's interests, because one just needs to look at the history of the Soviet Union, and I think it becomes very clear, you know. That doesn't mean that, you know, Americans or people don't think that Ukraine should have good relations with Russia, but they should be done on a basis where Russia shows respect for Ukraine, and I'm not sure that's been happening. In fact, it has not been happening, especially lately.
In the situation of Russia aggression, we heard a lot of statements. We saw the Duma pass the law to defend their soldiers. There is a lot of Russian soldiers in Ukraine, as we know, in Black Sea Fleet. In the situation of aggression, which we know happened with Georgia, right, what would United States be able to do? How United States would be able to support in this situation? Well,
that's an interesting question, and we get into really the nitty-gritty of policy things. I don't want to look, you'd have diplomatic support in that worst case scenario. It'll definitely, without a doubt, should something like that happen, harm our U.S. relations with Russia. I think if that happened, you could forget any kind of reset or whatever. There might be economic sanctions or what have you. There might be, so there's a arsenal, if you will, of tools that the U.S. could possibly undertake in that kind of very, you know, very negative scenario. I happen to think, and maybe I'm going out on a limb here, that Russia, as irrational as the statements of some of its leadership are, and I think we know what's behind that, and part of it is this continuing inability for all too many Russians to come to terms with an independent Ukraine. That's I think at the core and the root of the problem, and there are a lot of reasons for that, you know, could take a whole other discussion. But I don't think that Russia, even the current leadership, would really try to provoke a war or something along the lines of what Dugin said the other day, or what that resolution calls for. And especially because, with all due respect to Georgia, Ukraine isn't Georgia. And if Russia tried anything, frankly, there would be a lot more pushback on the part of Ukraine. And I think the more sober heads in the Kremlin completely understand that. That doesn't mean that, you know, there won't be attempts, and of course they already exist, to continue to influence or even undermine Ukraine, especially governments, you know, or presidents, like now that they don't
interfere in the internal affairs or election, as we see right
exactly now. You could already see that coming. Of course, the Russians should keep in mind, and I've even seen some commentators from Russia say that may not be a good idea, because that could end up having a counterproductive effect. But
backfire.
It backfire, precisely. So, you know, we'll see what happens in that realm. But I think it's an unhealthy relationship, and most of it is for the reasons I think I said, at the core of the problem being Russia's inability to recognize that and to accept, even psychologically or emotionally, even if they accept it in a way intellectually, in a certain way, but that Ukraine, their brother, as they like to often refer to it, you know, or cousins, Ukrainians, want to chart their own future, and that future might be a bit different than Russia's future.
It's a good ending point for our interview. What is the future of Ukraine?
I remember this is not original, but I remember somebody, you know, about a decade ago at one of these Washington think tanks, you know, saying that, or perhaps I read it, Ukraine is doomed to succeed. And I believe that it is. The question is it's sort of muddling along. It's done a lot of things right, okay?
And a lot of things
right,
wrong. Exactly.
Whenever you're talking about Ukraine, you sort of have to talk on the one hand, on the other hand, you know. But we'll compare it, for instance, to Belarus, okay? Ukraine has an open political system. It respects human rights and all that. Yes, it's vulnerable, let's say, to Russian pressures, partly because it doesn't quite have its act together internally and all the squabbling and whatnot, the energy question, which is a major vulnerability to Russia and which is something that Ukraine has really had a deficit on in terms of confronting the energy issue. But that's, again, another matter. But then on the other hand, if you think about it, Belarus is even more vulnerable to Russia. If it had an open political system like Ukraine, okay, if it had more market reforms like Ukraine, even though, again, like in Ukraine, it's still a work in progress, you know, if it was more, shall we say, European, it would be, if it had a more open political system, it would be less vulnerable to Russia. And we see right now, you know, how vulnerable Lukashenko is to Russia. It's really a problem.
From three countries, Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine, who signed that agreement to go apart in '91, who do you think succeed the most?
I think, despite all its flaws and all that, Ukraine has succeeded the most. You know, it is moving towards a Western direction, becoming more of a normal, civilized country. And it's moving forward, even if it fits and starts, even if it sometimes muddles along, you know, where Belarus and Russia seem to be moving backwards in many respects.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.